Good evening, everybody. Welcome to USF. I'm Elizabeth Davis. I'm the Dean of the School of Management at the University of San Francisco. So I want to welcome everybody here tonight. In the room, we have students, we have alumni, we have faculty, we have journalists, and generally friends of the university. We're really thrilled that you made the time in your calendars tonight to join us for what I think will be a stimulating evening featuring John Williams, who's president and CEO of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank. I'd also like to take the opportunity to extend a special thank you to the Federal Reserve recruiters who are here tonight really talking with our students and faculty alike. We have currently approximately 40 USF alumni working at various Federal Reserve banks throughout the U.S. After tonight, I hope that number will be 50. So talk tonight, talk to those recruiters. So tonight, I'm really honored to be able to introduce John Williams, who is President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. In 2011, he took over this role from his predecessor, Janet Yellen, who went on to become the first woman to lead the Federal Reserve. I first met John, we were talking a little bit about this at a Giants game near the dugout. We both sit on the Bay Area Council board together. But during that time, when we were watching this game, I had the opportunity to talk with him a little bit about tonight's event. That evening, we talked about bringing what I would consider very strategic information and perspectives into the classroom. And in addition to that, the opportunity to really ask John a little bit about his journey and his career. So tonight will really be a very unique window into the journey and also, I guess, the new economy after last night. For those of you who don't know so much about the Federal Reserve, let me give you just a few facts. The Fed decides how much money should be printed annually. So just for example, in 2010, 974 million was printed. In contrast, every year, about 30 billion of Monopoly Board money is printed, just as a basis for comparison. The San Francisco Fed has an asset value of $512 billion, giving it the second largest asset value after New York City. And John will correct me tonight if my statistics are a little bit off. Also, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco is the 12th district made up of 9 western states. And in that context, San Francisco is the largest of all the 12 districts, covering 36% of the nation's area and 60 million people. Before I ask John to come up, I also would like to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. John Veach. John is our director of the USF's Masters in Financial Analysis, and he'll be moderating the conversation. Just to give you a little bit more about John Veach, John did his PhD in economics from Northwestern and is a CFA. John specializes in financial analysis and risk management, and his research is related directly to the goals of our MSFA program. In other words, educating students and developing a broad understanding of micro, macro, and international trends that really influence the value of financial assets and in market fluctuations. Tonight, President Williams will share his views on the state of the economy today, a really timely topic given the events of last night. To give you a little bit about John, John, given his experience and insights into as I said, the largest district, he'll talk about the economic situation and talk about the new normal and how monetary policy can help to really ensure we have a vibrant and growing U.S. economy. John was previously the Executive Vice President of Research for the San Francisco Fed. He began his career as an economist at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System following the completion of his PhD in economics at Stanford. He holds a Master's of Science as well from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's from Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming President John Williams and Dr. John Beach.
So I think I'm going to talk for
Yes.
a few minutes. Sure. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And let me stand up here. Maybe that'll be easier to see everybody. So I'm just going to talk a few minutes about the economy and where I see it going. And then we're going to have I'm looking forward to the moderated discussion and the Q&A from the group. That's always the most interesting, most fun part. But let me just set the stage a little bit. When I'm in front of a group of students or faculty and staff from a university, it does take me back to think about how did I kind of start out on this journey to where I am today in terms of being a policymaker at the Fed. And when I was an undergraduate across the Bay a long time ago, I was an economics major. I was very interested in economic policy, and one of the things I learned studying economics is the importance that good economic policy, the importance of that in terms of how it affects people's lives, how it affects a country's prosperity and future, and how policies that are unsuccessful or harm outcomes for people in a country. So I was very focused on how do I somehow bring economics to the world of policy. And I didn't want to go into politics. I didn't see myself as a politician. And it was thinking then about how do you do that? How do you take the subject of economics and idea that you want to apply it to policy, but avoid running for office and all of that. And so it took a while. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later. I moved from job to job, but then going back to grad school, I had the great fortune of having some professors, both at London School of Economics and at Stanford, who really had a passion for economic policy, bringing economics to the policy world, whether it's in fiscal policy, monetary policy, and a passion for the importance of doing that and making a difference in that way. And that started me off on the journey, as we heard, as an economist at the Fed, and now for the last 5 years as the president of the San Francisco Fed. And what I'm finding I can do now is exactly what I dreamed of back when I was in college. Taking economics, taking everything I've and other people have learned over the past, and applying it to the real world. And when I say applying it to the real world, I mean literally applying economic thinking, statistical models, econometric analysis, all the things you learn when you study economics, to making the decisions whether we should raise or not raise interest rates. So let me very briefly tell you what that's like. So every 6 weeks, I get on a plane, fly to Washington, D.C. with all my colleagues in the Monetary Policy Committee, the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC. We get together every 6 weeks for 2 days. And the purpose of that meeting is to discuss the economy, discuss all of the perspectives that we're learning from across the country, the 12 Federal Reserve presidents, currently the 5 governors in Washington. And the 17 of us spent a whole day talking about the economic data, talking about what we're hearing from the business context, community leaders, from bankers, from others around the country. What are we hearing about what's happening in the economy and where people see some of the risks in the economy, where they see the economy going. And of course we have over 500 PhD economists who do a lot of analysis of the data about financial markets, about consumption, investment, inflation. And they take all that data and all the analysis, and we share that and spend a day talking about the U.S. economy, where we see it going, and in the context of the Fed's goals of maximum employment, full employment, and price stability, which we mean 2% inflation. Now, for a lot of people, spending a whole day, and I mean from morning to the 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, talking about economic data, macroeconometric models, all that. That may sound horrible, but to me it's a dream come true. This is what I love to do. This is what I was born for. And same with my colleagues. That's what we do. We sit around and discuss the data, we discuss the analysis, we debate the issues. What's normal unemployment? Is it 5%? Is it 4.5%? Is it 4.75%? How fast should the economy be growing? 2%, less, more, and why? How is the demographics changes in the economy affecting the labor market in our long-term perspectives? And most importantly, what does it mean for monetary policy? What does it mean for getting the right interest rate that will either propel the economy to grow faster or slow the economy so it doesn't overheat and maybe overshoot the mark. So trying to balance take all that data, all that analysis, all that information, and then the second day, we talk about policy. So given where the economy is going, given what we're seeing, given all the issues that I mentioned about the labor market and inflation and wages and what's happening in Europe, what's happening in China, what's happening in South America or India, we try to summarize all of that into thinking about this basic question: where are we in terms of full employment or maximum employment? Where are we in terms of the labor market in terms of that objective? And where are we relative to our 2% inflation objective? And where do we see the economy going over the next few years? Because as Milton Friedman and many others have taught us, monetary policy takes a year or two to have a full effect in the economy. So you always have to be looking ahead, looking through the front of the front window of your car, not looking in the rearview mirror. What do we discuss? Well, we go back to all the issues I already mentioned: the data, the forecasts that we make, the risks to the outlook. We do a lot of scenario analysis. We think about, well, what happens? For example, I'll roll back time a little bit. We did a scenario analysis around Brexit, Britain leaving the EU. How will that affect financial markets globally? How will that feed back on the U.S. economy? We do all of this analysis. In the end, we have to make a judgment. And we make a judgment about today the debate is, should we raise interest rates or not? And then basically, where do we see interest rates going over the next couple years? And the key thing I want you to hear from this opening remarks is throughout those day and a half, the 17 policymakers, the hundreds of economists who are involved in this, nowhere is there a discussion of politics, partisan politics, Republican, Democrat issues. All we're doing is looking at the data, analyzing it, talking to people around the country, talking to people around the world, trying to understand where the economy is, where it's going, and how can we best achieve the goals that the Federal Reserve Act, created by Congress, signed by the President, tells us, has given us in terms of our goals. It's an amazing place to work. I'm glad that we have recruiters here for students because I've been the Fed for 22 years, and it is an institution that is focused on our public mission, whether it's monetary policy and bank supervision around payments or other areas. And it's an organization that is very proud and determined to maintain its professional integrity around that mission. We're fortunate in our structure of the U.S. Government to have independence in terms of monetary policy, the ability to make these decisions every 6 weeks in Washington on Constitution Avenue, inside of the Capitol, Lincoln Memorial. The White House is a couple blocks away. Even though we're right in the center of Washington, D.C. and all that entails, we just sit there in those rooms, in that one room actually, and we just discuss the economy and how we can best achieve the goals that Congress gave us. It can be, to an outsider, very hard to understand all the things that we get into because we're incredibly nerdy, we're incredibly geeky. We do sit there and debate labor force participation, trends and things like that, and that is what we focus on. Is again the analysis that best achieves our goals. So again, thinking back to when I started, how do I get to apply economics, which I learned about really first when I was in college, when I took Econ 1, generally called Econ 101 in most places, but Cal Econ 1, and I realized this is a world that I didn't even know existed in terms of studying economics, and being able to apply this in a serious way every single day to public policy, trying to do the right thing the best we can to achieve the goals that we're given. So again, that's my brief story in terms of how I see the Fed and how I got to where I am. Let me just give you a very 2-minute version of where the economy is, where it's going. This is 2016. Looking back at 2009, where the economy was, I'm going to do what I said we do. I'm going to look at our two goals. Maximum employment, we tend to think about that in terms of the unemployment rate. That's kind of the best one indicator of the labor market. We look at dozens, but it's the best one indicator. Unemployment's 4.9% in the United States. Typical estimates of full employment, or 4 3/4 to 5% unemployment rate is a normal unemployment rate. So we're right in that range. So we're close to or at our objective at getting America back to work. We've added 14 million jobs over the last 5 or so years. Unemployment's come down from 10% to below 5% over the last 6 or 7 years. So there we've made a tremendous progress from where we were in the recession and where we need to be. In terms of inflation, the story there, which is a little different than what I grew up when I was in college, is inflation's been incredibly low. In fact, inflation today, measured the way that we look at it, is running about 1.7% over the last year. We want it to be 2%. And from what's happening in the economy, with a strong economy, growing economy, I'm expecting that inflation will move back to that 2% in the next year or two. So we're very close to achieving our goals. And the real question is, how do we get monetary policy right? As you get close to your goals, as we no longer need to provide so much of a boost to the economy, we can start gradually removing a lot of the easy monetary policy out of the system. And that means gradually over the next few years raising interest rates to more normal levels, consistent with an economy that's a lot stronger than it has been the last few years, an economy that's basically going to be close to its will be at our 2% inflation objective. So the way I think about the process of normalization of interest rates, or raising interest rates, normalization, by the way, is the euphemism for raising interest rates. So the process of raising interest rates and getting monetary policy back to normal is really about the fact that the economy is getting back to normal, and therefore it doesn't need as much of a help from really low interest rates and monetary stimulus. So it's a sign of the strength of the economy. And as the economy has done so much better, the Fed doesn't have to do so much to propel the economy forward. It's going to be a gradual process. It's going to take a few years. It's going to be driven by the data. It's going to be driven by us meeting every 6 weeks, sitting there spending 2 days arguing about every data series, arguing about the interpretation of this, and coming to decisions based on what the data are telling us and how we're achieving our goals. And that's how we've been operating as long as I've been in the Fed, and that's how I hope that we can continue to operate for the rest of my career. So I think that was 15 minutes, and I think now we can get to go to the fun part, which is let's talk with John.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks for that. So John, I really want to thank you for that insight into how the Federal Open Market Committee meets, and I think it's useful to everybody, but in particular for my students in econometrics and macroeconomics right now, you can see that everything that we do every day is kind of what the Federal Open Market Committee is doing. So it's kind of interesting to see just how applicable a lot of what we do in academics really sort of translates out into the real world. So I'm going to follow up on policy questions, but of course before I do that, I actually think that a much more important thing is I like to get a real sense of your journey, as it were. And we have a lot of students here, a lot of younger alumni. I mean, can you share some specific, maybe unconventional personal experiences that really prepared you well for the role that you find yourself in?
Well, I do have kind of a unique story. When I came out of college with the econ degree, honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My father was an attorney. I was fascinated by economics and policy. Didn't know how to best combine that. And then I had this other problem. My parents cut me off on funding the day I graduated. And that created an issue with my rent check on the next month. And that incentives matter. One thing you learn in first quarter of economics, incentives matter. And that incentive was to get a job. I think it's the way my mom said it. And I did. And my first job was actually working for a local entrepreneur, owned a number of businesses, including record stores and a small chain of pizza by the slice places in Berkeley and San Francisco called Blondie's Pizza. And over about 6 months, he suddenly realized that maybe this guy maybe had potential, and I became the manager and eventually general manager of this pizzeria in San Francisco on 63 Powell Street, and learned an enormous amount about how to manage a small business, how to meet a payroll, how to deal with hiring and firing. You do a lot of firing when you're in small businesses. How to develop people, how to deal with situations that you just never dealt with before. Sometimes you learn that you can do stuff that you didn't think you could do because you never done it before. Sometimes you learn that you screwed things up, and you really need to learn from that experience, from the mistakes. And I think that was a really important formative experience. Also, And most importantly, I met my wife at Blondie's Pizza. She worked there too. And that's 30 years later, we're still together. But after that, both of us were trying to figure out, well, okay, this is fun. We're learning a lot. But both of us wanted to go and get back to kind of our original goals, her in healthcare, and me was thinking about this policy thing. And that's when I decided to do the London School of Economics and get back to, I realized that for me to achieve my goals, I needed to get more training in economics. I needed to take it to a higher level, and I did a one-year master's degree, and that's where I encountered my professors who basically, said, you can, economics can change the world for better. You should apply yourself to that, and that's when I decided to continue studying that, and really kind of started the journey I'm on now. But I would argue that experience from college to getting back to graduate school is really important for who I am today, and it's helped me out too. I'll tell you a quick story. When I got nominated for this job to be president of the San Francisco Fed, you have to interview with all the governors in Washington. And one of the governors, Betsy Duke, is a banker. She's retired from the board now. But she met with me and she said, John, I know you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself, though? You're an economist, but tell me more. And I told her the story of the fact that for several years, I'd run a small business, the challenges I ran, and she goes, we really need someone who's actually met a payroll on the FOMC. You're in. So that was my competitive advantage.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm going to ask you the question that everybody in the room probably wants to ask you.
Yeah.
What should we invest in?
So, well, the first thing is you never ask an economist what you should invest in, because economists all believe in our theories when it comes to this. You obviously, Jim Tobin famously got his Nobel Prize for a great economist, Janet Yellen's advisor at Yale. But when I asked what was the research you earned the Nobel Prize for, he said, well, basically, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's, diversify your portfolio and all that. But let me be serious, because a lot of students here, a lot of people, in that part of life where you're deciding about the value of education, perhaps continuing in graduate education, the most important and the highest yielding investment decision you will ever make is your education. It's not about stocks and bonds and getting that right. It's really about the education you're getting for those in school today or thinking about continuing education. The economic data, the analysis that we've done and others have done shows that the rate of, the internal rate of return on education, higher education today is as high or higher than it's ever been. It's not true when you hear you don't need to go to college anymore, you don't need to go to, get education. That's simply not supported by the data. And it also opens up so many opportunities from a career and a life point of view. So that's my advice, is education is really where it's at. I am not being asked to or to do this by the University of San Francisco. This is my honest view, and that to me, not only does it have a high monetary rate of return, but I think from a point of view of your life experiences and things, it has a huge return too. That's my experience.
Great, thank you. So I am going to get into the policy questions now, and of course that means that I literally have to address the elephant in the room, right? What do you think the election of President Trump means for Fed policy going forward? And is there a big impact, or is the Fed pretty much focused on the economy rather than the politics?
So first, as I said earlier, the independence of the Fed, which is written into the law, is hugely important in terms of our ability to carry out our mission. We, like I said, meet every 6 weeks. There's no member of the administration, there's no member of Congress in the room. It's just the policymakers from the Fed, it's the staff from the Fed. And we basically, we totally get to do this on our own and make the decisions around monetary policy. Now, that's an important part of the Fed, but it's also true in a lot of other countries. One of the lessons from 100 years of central banking is that independent central banks tend to perform better, keep inflation low, and that's something that most countries, the most successful countries, have accepted, as has the U.S. So from my perspective, that's the most important thing for the Fed, to continue to have the ability to make the monetary policy decisions that are best for the long run for the U.S. And I'm confident we'll continue to have that support for that in the future, no matter what political changes may happen. But in terms of how do I think about political changes and the economy, first of all, the big ones you think about when you talk about government is fiscal policy, spending and taxes and things like that. And I want to reiterate or comment on that, for someone who's been doing macro forecasting, modeling, policy analysis for a long time, fiscal policy is only one of many things that affect the U.S. economy. It's definitely on the list. It's something we study, but we also study what's happening in Europe, what's happening in China, what's happening with various aspects of our economy. For example, today, a lot of our analysis and our focus is about how the economy is changing with technology, maybe the gig economy, things like that. So there's just a long list of things that are happening to the economy that affect it. And honestly, fiscal policy and some of these other things, they're just on that list, and we analyze all of them and think about them, but it's really all focused into this funnel of what's it mean in terms of our achieving maximum employment, what's it mean in terms of our price stability, and just focus on getting monetary policy right for that. So that's how I view all of these issues, just as try to get the big picture, where's the economy, where's this going, and what does that mean for monetary policy in terms of where should interest rates be?
Okay. I'm actually going to follow up on something you said, and I would have followed up regardless of who was elected, actually, because it seems that the political climate from both sort of the far left and the far right takes a pretty negative view of what the Fed has done in the past, let's say, decade, all right, leading up to the crisis, after the crisis, and through today. Mm-hmm. There are calls from both of those wings, whether it was Hillary or Trump, calls from both of those wings to hem in the Fed's independence. And I understand written into law. Do you worry about that? Do you worry about there being sort of more interference in what the Fed does?
So, obviously, I think it's very important to have the independence, ability to make, difficult and potentially unpopular decisions that we think are in the best interest of the long-run health of the U.S. economy. So having that independence is very important. And when there have been ideas or proposals to try to limit that independence, I think that those could be harmful. And I think the independence is really what matters. In terms of the criticism of the Fed and quite honestly many parts of government, I view that as part of democracy. I view that as part of America, that people question decisions that are made. We did have a global financial crisis. The U.S. Was at the center of that. We had a terrible recession. I think it makes sense that people are asking the questions of what did we do right, what could we do better. I know that we ask that of ourselves all the time. We challenge ourselves. Have we thought? Are we thinking about these issues right? Is our approach to the best one? So the fact that people are commenting or criticizing the Fed and what the Fed's done, I mean, to me that is a part of a healthy society. I personally, having been involved in this and having studied it a lot, feel that the Fed's monetary policies, specifically on that, have been hugely important to getting the U.S. economy back to full strength and avoiding some of the things we're seeing in other countries. And what I mean by that is a kind of stagnation and or very low inflation or deflation. So in Europe, throughout almost all of Europe, in Japan and other parts of the world, what you're seeing is inflation not only very, very low and close to zero, but trending in many cases the wrong way. And governments and central banks really struggling with achieving their goals their goals that they have. So I compare where we are at the U.S. to some of the challenges other countries are facing, and I think that monetary policy has been an important part of the reason we've gotten kind of so close to achieving our goals. And I think I would be open to people criticizing the actions we've done. I understand that, but I think we've done a lot of the right things to help get this economy back on track.
Oh, great. Well, again, it's almost like we sort of coordinated ahead of time, but we didn't actually. So, you've championed this idea of maybe raising the inflation target. I've heard you, sort of. Well, okay, you've at least been quoted as being in favor of it. So, do you support raising the Fed's inflation target above 2%? And again, this is sort of wrapped into, don't you think this might hurt the adjustable rate mortgage market, the U.S. housing market? This is in light of The Economist magazine, who recently had a front page cover on potential vulnerabilities in U.S. housing market. So can we hear your thoughts on that?
Sure. So Okay, I'm going to get geeky here. I have to explain the reasoning a little bit here. And this gets to the new normal question. And this new normal is not about the one I'm going to talk about. It's not about politics. It's not about elections. It's really about fundamental economic forces that have been going on globally for the last decade or more. And what we've seen globally is a slowdown in economic growth. That's true in the United States in terms of the trend or potential output, if you think about that. In Europe, in Japan, in China, Southeast Asia. Around the world, global growth is slowing. It's part of a natural process due to the slowing demographics, slower productivity growth, changes in where certain developing countries are relative to the frontier. So with the slowing globally of growth, what we're seeing is less demand for investment, for housing, for businesses, for things like that. And we're at the same time, because of the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis, the Euro crisis, we're seeing this huge increase in demand for safe assets, for savings, something Ben Bernanke a decade ago called the global savings glut. So we have huge increase in savings. Investment demand falling globally, not just in the U.S., but overall. And what that does is to, remember supply and demand, they have to equal at the equilibrium or the price level. Well, the price for savings and investment is the interest rate. And so what we've seen globally, and the U.S. In particular, for the last 10, 15 years, is that the equilibrium or normal real interest rate, the interest rate adjusted for inflation, is much lower today than it used to be. And what that does is it creates problems, challenges for monetary policy. If you think about how does monetary policy work? Well, in a recession, so in normal times, interest rates are at a normal level and we keep them there. When the economy goes in recession, the Fed cuts interest rates. That makes it a little bit more advantageous to buy a car or a house or a new washer or dryer, boosts the economy, tries to get you back to full employment. When the economy is overly strong, we raise interest rates, we try to cool the economy, take the punch bowl away, the economy slows down a bit and then it gets back to normal. So this is how we raise interest rates when things are good, lower interest rates when the economy is bad. Well, in a world of very low interest rates to start with, because of the global factors I talked about, the Fed doesn't have much room to cut interest rates from the start. So let me tell you where the Fed is on this. Our median projection, median forecast of where interest rates will be 5, 10 years from now is right now at 2.9% for a short-term interest rate, 2.9%. So that's much lower. If you had asked me this question 15 years ago, I said 4.5%. So we're down to below 3. So that means the next time we have a recession or some shock happens, we can only cut interest rates maybe 290 or 2.9 percentage points, and then you hit the zero lower bound. It's hard to cut interest rates much below zero. You can do it a little bit, but not too much. So this is one of the changes in this new economy, slower growth, lower interest rates. Monetary policy just has a little bit less room to maneuver. So I think instead of saying I champion a higher inflation target, let me say how I see it. I think we need to be thinking about this issue. We need to be thinking, have economists, policymakers saying, hey, if the new normal really is very low interest rates, what's that mean for the decisions we've made about how to conduct monetary policy? What's the right inflation target that we should be shooting for? What's the right framework that we should be using? And what are the trade-offs we face in doing that? I think this is often kind of under this category that Larry Summers talks about of secular stagnation, but I don't need to go that far where we're kind of a doom and gloom view. I'm just saying in a world where with lower growth, lower interest rates, how should we at the Fed and other central banks be thinking about how can we best achieve our goals of maximum employment and price stability? So I think my goal here is to start a conversation with policymakers around the world, but also among academics, experts, to really start thinking long-term about what's the best strategy to approach a world, a much slower growth world.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to misquote you again, hopefully
That's
not. Okay, so so you've been kind of on record as for measured rate rises over the past the past year or so. But recently, this is like in the past couple of weeks, it was reported, so I'm not saying you said it, it was reported that you did not disagree with Fed Chair Janet Yellen, who suggested that running a high-pressure economy may be the best way to reverse damage from the financial crisis. And so can you give us an insight into that, particularly because the Fed is expected to raise rates in December? So what is this high-pressure economy, and what's the feeling in the Fed about that?
Yeah. So, by the way, I was supposed to say this at the beginning. I didn't. Everything I say is my own views, doesn't reflect anybody else in the Fed. Okay? Got it. Whoa. I almost missed out on that. seriously, so I am speaking for myself. Obviously, I don't speak for Chair Yellen. I don't speak for my other colleagues. But let me answer. It's a great question. So I think, my view is I think of this as the Goldilocks economy. I want the Goldilocks economy. I don't want it too hot or too cold. So let me start with the too cold. Inflation is running about 1.5%, 1.75%, as I said. That's below our 2% goal. It's been below our 2% goal for several years now, and that is a big concern of mine. I've been looking at low inflation around the globe, in Europe and Japan, in many other countries, and I don't want us to be consistently missing too low on inflation. I want to see inflation get back to 2%. So from that perspective, I do want the economy to be strong, hot, if you will. I want an economy that's actually where the unemployment rate and jobs are even stronger than maybe the normal level. So unemployment, that's below 5%. I want to see unemployment rate come down further. I want to see continued good job gains. So I do want to see the economy to be strong, to create a little bit more wage inflation, create a little bit more inflationary pressure to get that inflation back to 2%. So in that sense, I completely agree with Chair Yellen that running a hot economy for a while is totally consistent with our goals of maximum employment and price stability. There's no real tension there because inflation's too low. So we do want to run a hot economy for a while. But here's where I go to the Goldilocks principle. We don't want it to be too hot for too long. So when you talk about the process of gradually raising interest rates, I do think we should have a hot economy, but we know from history that if we push too hard on that, if we push unemployment, say, all the way down to 4% and keep it there for a couple years, then what we see there is that some imbalances will form. Either inflation will pick up and get too high, perhaps we'd be increasing an asset price bubble in housing or the stock market or some other area. So I just want to kind of get that balance. Having a very strong economy, having a sustainable strong economy. So one where unemployment's between 4.5%, 4.75% for the next several years to help sustain a very good economy, low unemployment, and inflation moving to 2%. I do worry that if we go too far, keep interest rates too low for too long, we may overshoot the mark, and then what happens is there will be a reversal and maybe even a recession out of that. By the way, I agree with Chair Yellen's, the way she describes this in her comments. That's why I agreed with that. I think, really we are, at the Fed, we have a commitment across all the members of the Monetary Policy Committee about our objectives. We actually every year agree to a document, a one-pager, about what our goals are, how we interpret them, what our policy strategy is. We all agree about how we're thinking about the economy if you look at the projections that come out. The differences are, what's the best way to achieve these goals? And we're really saying, should we raise rates this meeting or maybe wait another meeting or two? The debates are really trying to get it exactly right based on all the things that are happening. Fundamentally, if you look at my colleagues' projections, they all have interest rates moving up gradually over the next couple of years. Some may be a little bit sooner or quicker than others, but it's, the debates really are just about this issue of, is this the right time, or do I want to collect a little bit more data, get a little more confidence in where things are before we move next time. So that's the way I would try to square these two views. And I do want to reiterate, any interest rate increases we do in the future really are because the economy is doing better. It's not because of some notion that we need to raise interest rates for some other reason.
Okay. I'm going to follow up a little bit on that too, because my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that President Trump actually has 2 appointees, that the board composition could change a little bit. There's 2 new board members that are coming on.
So right now we have 2 openings.
2 openings, okay.
On the Board of Governors. So the Board of Governors consists of 7 presidential appointees subject to Senate confirmation. They serve 14-year terms. Among those 7 are the chair and the vice chair. So currently we have 2 openings that have been open for some time. And then, like I said, each sitting governor has a 14-year term. So there definitely are 2 openings available now, and will most likely be available next year as well.
So do you see that as sort of having the potential to change consensus? or not? I mean,
So I'm not going to
simply the news reports are really sort of pushing this hard as it's 2 appointees, and that's going to change the timing.
I'm not
on
going to
this.
speculate. I have no idea what will happen there. But let me tell you something that, honestly, from my experience, I've been in the Fed for 22 years. And I've been through various administrations that worked with appointees from the the George H.W. Bush administration, obviously President Clinton's administration, President Bush's administration, and the President Obama's administration. So I have worked with. Well, the governors. Okay, to be fair, they have oversight responsibilities over me. So there's multiple roles here. But I have worked closely with appointees from all of these administrations. And what I would, again, reiterate is we are focused on the economy, focused on achieving our goals. It's not a partisan activity in terms of monetary policy, in terms of other things. And I also would just comment about how fortunate we've been at the Federal Reserve that the appointees from all these administrations across the board have been amazing people with great experience, bring a lot of experience either from academics or from the business world or from other areas where and we all come together and work together. So I think the Fed is a very special place, and we've been very fortunate to have stellar people on the board, as my colleagues around the system. And I just hope that continues.
Thank you. I'm going to reword, we had an audience survey kind of participation. I'm going to get a sort of a reworded audience question. So question is, will raising U.S. interest rates at a time of economic weakness, kind of almost everywhere else in the world, is that going to generate a sustained depreciation of the dollar? And is that likely to have significant impacts on U.S. export, generally, the 12th district in particular? And this is like an 8-part question. Is it also likely to negatively maybe impact some of these struggling economies?
This is what I call a leading question, actually. So that's a great question, right? Clearly, if on its own, raising interest rates is designed to slow growth relative to what it would otherwise be, as I said, it must be clear. And in this context of the global economy, we know that as the Fed has tightened policy and other countries have gone the opposite, they've been actually doing more monetary easing, the dollar appreciated a lot in 2014, 2015. So that's clearly in our, something that we think a lot about. In fact, the appreciation of the dollar back in 2014, 2015 is still with us. It's not like the dollar has, reversed all of that, and that's still having a big effect on the U.S. economy because it affects trade, it affects jobs, affects inflation, importantly, because a strong dollar actually means that imported goods are cheaper, and imported goods are included in the inflation rate. So those are clearly factors that we take into consideration. In fact, I will be open with you that I think one of the reasons it's made sense for the Fed not to have raised interest rates much so far, we did have that one rate increase last year, is because of the weakness abroad, because of struggles with Europe and Japan and slowdown in China and the strengthening of the dollar. If it hadn't been for all those things happening, if Europe and Asia were doing great and the dollar had not appreciated, we would have needed to raise interest rates much sooner and much more. So again, it's this counterfactual. Economists love the counterfactual because we get to make up things. But in the counterfactual, where the global economy is strong, it would make sense for our growth would be much stronger, our exports would be stronger, and inflation would be higher. So we would be raising interest rates more. So again, it's a Goldilocks kind of principle. We need to go later and slower because of the global factors. But that said, inflation's about 1.7, moving to 2%, unemployment's below 5%. In that context, it makes sense, I would say, to ease off on the gas a bit. Remember, the Fed funds rate, the rate that we control is about 40 basis points, 0.4%, right? This is one of the lowest levels of interest rates in any of our lifetimes. So we're not talking about having high interest rates. What we're talking about is just moving gradually interest rates closer to a more normal level.
Okay, I think this is my last question before we turn it over to the audience. So this is really focused on the Bay Area and our mythical economy. So I kind of want to talk about rate rises, potential impacts on not so much the stock market as a whole, but this whole sort of funding of, we've got unicorns here, we've got, venture capitalists, we've got all this. Are you worried about that potential impact on the 12th district? So just on here.
No, The 12th district is, as we mentioned earlier, is the 9 western states, and we were hit really hard by the housing crash. We had think about where the center of the storm was for the housing boom and crash. It was basically in, the West Coast and the Southeast, like Florida and things like that, places like that. So, it's taken us a long time to recover from that in general. But right now, overall, our district is back to basically where the U.S. economy is. When I look at the Bay Area and I look at tech in the Bay Area, Seattle and other areas, I mean, this is booming beyond belief. This is an extremely strong, robust sector. I'm not worried about, raising short-term interest rates by, 25 basis points as a quarter percentage point, or even several times doing that over a few years in terms of affecting fundamentally the profitability or the desirability of these investments and this activity. I actually think the tech sector is less sensitive short-term interest rates than most areas. First of all, the tech sector is primarily equity financed, it's not going to be so sensitive to leverage and interest rates. But again, our job in the end is national. We're looking at where the whole U.S. economy is and trying to get the big picture and try to get interest rates to get that right. Clearly, a little bit higher interest rates, might mean a little bit higher dollar. But again, I don't think that's a big effect on, in terms of specific sectors around here. So I don't see monetary policy as being the main, being an important change in terms of some of these issues. Where I do see monetary policy potentially affecting things is in the areas like commercial real estate or housing. Clearly, these are areas that are very interest sensitive, and as interest rates do move up, some of the incredibly low financing costs will be less incredibly cheap. Low. But again, I go back to this new normal. If you think that a normal interest rate is less than 3% at the short term, if that's where we're really heading, which is what my colleagues and I think, we're not talking about going to interest rates like 8 or 10% like in the 80s or something. We're talking about interest rates that even after we've normalized are probably going to be very low from the point of view for businesses.
Great, thank you. So I believe now we're going to turn it over to the audience. So if you have questions, could you raise your hand?
Wow,
we have a microphone.
Hi, I'm Benedict. I'm a full-time MBA student here, but I was studying economics, and I remember something like that the economy is stable if there are no surprises. So I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but when the Fed promised to normalize the interest rate and they did not do that, it's delayed, that throws a punch to the economy. So why is that? Why if you promise it, you don't raise it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm going to disagree with the premise, but it's a great question. I like the way you phrase that. So first, the premise was that we promised that we'd be raising interest rates. So let me go back in time to reinforce your point. Back in December 2015, the median projection from my colleagues at the FOMC, me and my colleagues, the median of all of our views was we would raise interest rates 4 times this year, 2016. Well, we haven't done that. We haven't raised interest rates at all in 2016. And that has, as you said, people are saying, what's going on? Why isn't the Fed doing anything? Why aren't they doing what they said they were going to do? Well, when we said that our projection was 4 rate increases this year by the end of the year, we said that depended on the data. It depended on what's happening with the job growth, what's happening with inflation, and what's happening more generally about what's the right level of interest rates in order to achieve our goal. So there's some nice analysis that came out of the San Francisco Fed a few days ago. They looked at why, taking the projections from last December, roughly a year ago, and let's look at what we've learned since then in terms of the FOMC's median view of things. So what have we learned looking December to September? Well, one thing we've learned is that unemployment hasn't come down as much as we thought. Unemployment has basically been flat for the last year. It's low, it's good, but it hasn't been coming down as much as we thought or hoped. So that means that all else equal, the economy is not doing quite as well as we hoped. So let's put off on raising interest rates, which is like putting a little bit of, slowing down taking a foot off the gas, because we're not doing quite as well as we hoped on unemployment. Some of that's good news, by the way. A lot of people are coming back to the labor force. But again, from our full employment objective, inflation's been a touch higher than we thought, and that's a little bit of an offset. What's the big story? Why haven't we raised interest rates? Well, there's been a fundamental shift in the view of this normal interest rate. So if you asked my colleagues a year ago, and this is all in our economic projections, it's all on the website. I'm not giving away secrets here. It's all, this is transparent Fed. So if you look a year ago, or December, the view of where normal interest rates, what's a normal level for interest rates, was quite a bit higher than it is today. Today, like I said, it's about 2.9%. So before it was about 3.5%, I think, if my memory serves me right. Well, so it's really a shift in the view of what kind of a neutral level is. And so when you think about, well, if you think the neutral level of interest rates is much lower, then that's kind of an argument that maybe we don't have as much stimulus as we thought, and we don't have as far to go to get back to normal. And that's, again, an argument to maybe go a little bit slower in getting normal interest rates back to normal. So Chair Yellen at her press conference highlighted these two arguments in describing why we haven't moved interest rates up yet. And I think it gets back to what we really want people to think of the Fed. We want people to think of the Fed as data dependent, driven by the economy, the data, the analysis, and what does that mean for policy? We're not making promises to raise interest rates. We're not saying we're going to raise interest rates at any given point in time. We're saying that based on where we see things going, this is what we think is a likely course, but we're going to change that if the data come in differently. And I think we've proven that we're doing that, and I think that's a healthy thing.
Any questions? Yeah.
It's hard to turn around.
Thanks for your comments. The question that I have relates to the level of the federal debt and the risk-free rate. Back in 2008, I think the short-term treasury rate has always sort of been used as the theoretical proxy for the risk-free rate, and that's sort of the first time it became thought that perhaps it's not a risk-free investment. And how do you think about the level of the federal deficit and how high it can go, where it is historically? I think they relate it to the gross domestic product. Mm-hmm. And thoughts on one side about getting the deficit down, and the reality seems to be that neither party has been successful at doing that. And I'm wondering your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think as the economy has gotten back closer to full strength, these issues about the long-run health of the economy in terms of deficits and debt, in terms of other policies, really are things that we should generally be focused on and thinking hard about. By the way, I will brag a little bit that when I was at the Council of Economic Advisors in 1999-2000, we did have a surplus. So it's possible for the federal government to actually run surpluses. So I think there is a way to get, to tackle some of these issues. But the other point I'd make is 16 years ago, we also recognized then that these are long-term issues where the trends are moving away from us. Demographics, in terms of, longer-term trends basically are making the cost of Medicare, Social Security, other things rising faster than the revenues. So this is recognized by all experts that our long-run fiscal situation in the federal government is unsustainable. I mean, this has been recognized for 20 years or more. This is not a Democratic, Republican or view. This is a view that comes out of the Congressional Budget Office. It comes out of, leading experts around the world. So I think that you're right that we need to be focused in the long term about what's a sustainable level of deficits and debt. And I don't think there is a magic number about what the debt to GDP ratio is. Currently, by the way, publicly held federal debt relative to GDP is around 75%. That's a lot higher than it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't think there's a magic number. I think what matters is it's sustainable. The level of debt and deficits, adds up in a way that it's not exploding and getting larger and larger over time. So, clearly this is an issue that we do struggle with dealing with. I think that, lesson of my my own watching these issues is when they become more acute, like the Social Security was about to run out of money in the early 80s, suddenly there's some political will to tackle these issues. So I'm hopeful that we can do that a little bit before the last minute. But again, I agree with you that we need to have a long-run sustainable fiscal situation. I think the challenge, as you brought up, is that the Treasury rate is viewed as kind of this risk-free rate, but it's incredibly low. I mean, the government is borrowing, federal government is borrowing at all-time low interest rates. And because of that, because of the global demand for U.S. Treasuries, there's really no pressure at all on the government to try to deal with these longer-term issues. And you can say we got too big of a deficit or too big of a debt, but quite honestly, global investors are gobbling up U.S. Treasuries as fast as they can get them. So I think that's part of that political dynamic, that there's just not a lot of pressure around these issues. Now, the politics of this, or I'm saying the right decision to how to get this right, that's up to the political process. The Fed doesn't do this. We don't do fiscal policy. We don't do taxes. We don't do spending. But from the point of view of policymakers and economists, I think it is important for us to reiterate the need to tackle these problems in the long run, because otherwise it'll just drive up the cost of borrowing. It will lower productivity in the U.S. There'll be a lot of negative consequences to having, continuing this unsustainable fiscal policy in the long run.
One in the back.
Hey, thanks for your comments. My name is Mohit, and I work at Wells Fargo. I have a question. So, has the Fed purposely distorted asset markets and created a bubble? And if so, why?
So, okay, I wanted to see your facial expression when I said yes. Finally, they admit it. Okay, so I'm going to give you my honest answer, and that is low interest rates that we've been doing now. When we cut the short-term interest rates to zero in 8 years ago, I always have to remember how long ago it was, December of 2008. We bought over $4 trillion we have $4 trillion of assets on our balance sheet in order to move long-term interest rates down. All these things to move interest rates low. All of these work through monetary policy, works through asset markets. I mean, low interest rates, one of the things it does, it makes it cheaper to buy a car or a house, all that. It also makes the relative return from a fixed income, like a bond, lower, and so that's going to push the stock values up because the alternative returns are lower. It's going to push commercial real estate, residential real estate prices up. That is how monetary policy works. That's a textbook explanation. That's not controversial. That's not distorting. That's that monetary policy, by having low interest rates, boost values of other assets, other real assets. Now, normally that's a cyclical up and down. So during a booming economy, we're actually probably making the stock market weaker. During a slow economy, we're boosting it. But on average, it doesn't have much of an effect. Now, so I wouldn't say distort. I would just say that's how monetary policy always works. Now, I think what's getting conflated a little bit today in the public discussion is that there's two things going on today. One is the Fed has definitely got the foot on the gas, right? We're stimulating the economy. So we're doing that thing of lowering interest rates and boosting, asset prices. At the same time, I think these global factors are driving a lot of money into safe assets, into the U.S. market, and also having that effect. We know that in commercial real estate, where money's pouring into U.S. assets, because U.S. assets have high returns relative to assets around the world. So I think there's a global or structural factors or longer-term factors that are also layering on top, pushing interest rates lower and pushing asset prices in the U.S. higher. So as a Fed economist, I try to figure out how much of is it us and our policy, and as we move policy back to normal, how much of an effect will that have, versus how much of this is probably more long-lived is because of its global factors. But I think right now we're kind of getting we used to call things like triple witching hour things. We're getting all these things happening together. Globally, massive liquidity, a very strong desire to go to higher returns, safe returns of the U.S., and at the same time monetary policy being low. So I think all of these are kind of coming together, boosting asset prices at the same time. But we're not trying to create a bubble or trying to distort. I think it's just all these things happening at the same time.
Yeah, we have a question from the other side of the room.
Mr. Williams, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to listen to you. Actually, I'm happy that I see a person like you that is in that position and worked in a pizza place for quite a time, because I myself ran a pizza place in Germany for 10 years.
Yeah.
So it gives me hope for the future.
It's a great experience.
Yeah. I have actually a question about one touch point on a new normal of low interest rate. Actually, in the past, when you wanted to put money aside for your pension, you could do it like in bonds and fixed income, and it give you like a quite decent return.
Mm-hmm.
And with a low interest like that, and an elderly population in various like developed countries, I see a problem that you as a young man have to put aside even more money in order to achieve the goal with a certain risk level. So how do you see this issue handled, or how do you see this issue developing in the future?
Right, I agree with the point you're making. The point with a new normal of very low real rates of return is that this means everybody, right? I mean, this means that if you're a young person trying to save for your retirement, if you're close to retirement and you realize you haven't saved enough, that you're in a world where you're going to have to save more in order to offset that. So that's part of that new equilibrium. I think in the transition, the challenges are even bigger for the existing pension funds, insurance companies, and other entities that have these long-term liabilities, these promises to their employees or to others to make these payouts in the future. But now they're finding that the returns on their assets are now much lower than they assumed before. So I think this is a very big issue that is affecting a lot of institutions today in the U.S. and around the world, because this is not just about the U.S. One of the things that I worry about is that does, as you said, or you implied, it leads to a reach for yield, going after more risk. If you can't get it through, a portfolio of safe assets and you can't get the yields you need, you're going to go out a little bit on the risk curve, or maybe the duration curve, move out and take a little bit more risk in order to try and make up for that. That's kind of a natural reaction. I think we see that today. The problem is that what happens, again, globally, you have everybody saying, I got to get this return. I'm not getting it through safe assets, so now I'm going to push, take on more and more risk. And so from a financial stability point of view, we at the Fed and other central banks monitor this very closely. I mean, to what extent are financial institutions, or other entities really kind of taking too much risk in order to offset the thing that you're talking about? So that, to me, there are a lot of dimensions of this. There's the individual dimension that you're talking about that we all face. There's a dimension of how do institutions deal with this, and then what does it mean for the risks in our financial system? I mean, some people, I'm not saying I buy this 100%, but some people blame the housing bubble for a lot of these kind of same dynamics. That income growth had slowed for middle income people to get a house. They suddenly had to borrow more. Globally, there was this huge inflow of capital to the United States because of higher returns, and so these dynamics that can create or amplify imbalances in any given country, are clearly worrisome, and something that we study a lot to make sure they're not happening. So where was the pizza place?
In Germany.
Where?
In Hanover.
Okay, I lived in Germany for a year, so there's something about pizza.
And with that, I think we're going to close our talk with President Williams. I'd like us all to thank President Williams for what has been a really frank and I think interesting discussion. Thank you. So before you leave, we have the Fed recruiters over in the corner, so I really strongly encourage any students or alumni who might look at this as a career to go over and discuss it with the recruiters. And again, I think it's been just, I don't know about you, but I found it fascinating. And thank you so much.
It's really great.
Yeah,
I appreciate all the great questions. Thanks.